All right, we're now recording. Measuring effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. The learning objectives of this case study were to help you understand the complicated issue of measuring organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector, to recognize the tensions in the nonprofit sector between business-like approaches to organizational development and more holistic approaches to service. Basically, it's the fight or argument between qualitative and quantitative. Mm-hmm. That's why we start with this one. See, everybody doesn't like quantitative methods, but then you've got the quants like me who argue that qualitative doesn't give you the numbers. And that's always going to be the struggle in any organization, any nonprofit, or as Dr. Hamilton referred to as for impact organizations. That's always the internal struggle between qualitative and quantitative. And that's what this one's about, very simply. And you're to learn more about the role of communication in the social construction of organizational. Social construction is qualitative. And that's the hook on this one is the qualitative. So very quickly, let me run through what you should have learned or a brief synopsis, and then I'll turn it over to Lisa. All right, let me go to my PowerPoint. Hopefully you will be able to see this. All right, here are the key players. We've identified all those key players, who they are. And there's their little brochure. And here's what they are. They're a clearinghouse for nonprofits. All right, and there's their little community dashboard and their little material. All right, here's the problem that they perceive. Changes in the nonprofit industry, economic downturn, high demand on system due to unemployment, less money and services available due to budget cuts and decreased revenue. Partner organizations are rethinking funding, private foundation, government grants. The perceived problem is the for-profit world can focus on profit or return on investment. Nonprofits are interested in impacting things that are difficult to quantify, such as social improvement or personal well-being. All right. Pressure from funders to measure effectiveness and demonstrate effectiveness. The actual problem is there is no magic bullet. There is no one instrument. There is no quantitative only measurement for organizational effectiveness. The problem comes in is that it's different for each organization, and so you actually have to go to the theory of social constructivism and find qualitative means to measure, and that means you have to have an interaction between each individual. There is no one size fits all. In qualitative measures, you learn very quickly that it's based on the organization, and there has to be almost a separate measurement for each organization. All right. And there's social construct reporting effectiveness. And you can quantify and measure some things, but you have to create relevant process and evaluate them regularly. A qualitative. So here are my recommendations. It's basically a mixed methodology. You can do some quantitative things, but you really have to do more qualitative things. All right. And so the bottom line is nonprofits that do not implement formal evaluation systems suffering fundraising compared to better prepared organizations that can concisely and compellingly communicate the meaningful results of their programs. And that means qualitative, not significant and quantitative. All right. So let me turn this over to Lisa. Let me see if I can do that now. Lisa, I am going to make you the host.
Okay.
And you should be able to now control the screen.
Okay.
Let's see, it'll take a second. And then if you will go to new share, you will be able to, on your dashboard, go to new share. You should be able to project your screen.
Okay. It says share screen, and do you want to continue? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So no, it's still showing your desktop on my desktop. You are viewing Dale Lamb's screen.
Okay. All right. So if you will go again, let me make sure that you are now the host. Yeah, you're the host.
Okay. Hold on. Okay. Here we go. Can you see that?
No, it hadn't come up yet, but it should.
That's odd. It may be because, well, I don't know. When we practiced this, we didn't have any trouble.
Do you have a participants logo on your toolbar?
Yeah, manage participants 9.
Okay, so click on participants, and it should give you the option to claim the host.
If I click on myself?
Yeah. It says more.
Yeah, and it says all I get is mute participants on entry, play, enter, exit, chime, and lock meeting.
Hey, Lisa?
Yep.
I know I'm not the best with technology, but if you click the Alt button and S at the same time, what happens?
Alt S. Nothing. I've got a Mac mic, so I just tried
Oh, ho, ho.
Yeah. So in the middle of the very bottom of the screen, there's options that says invite participants, share screen, chat, and record. If you can find a share screen button.
Yeah, no, I did, and that's what I've checked on, and it gives me the options of desktop 1, whiteboard, iPhone, iPad, AirPlay, iPhone via cable, and that's it. But let me
I would try desktop.
Let me try this. Wait, do you guys see that now? Share screen?
It says it's starting, but I think you need to choose which one you want to share.
Yeah, there it is.
There? Can you see it? The present?
I see it.
I still see Dr.
So Sheila, you're seeing mine?
I see it as well.
Yes.
So you guys see this?
Not come up on my screen yet.
Microsoft versus Apple. I love it.
Well, I can start. Daryl and Sheila and I can start talking us through this rather than wait until everybody can actually see the slides. So if you guys are okay with us narrating, then we're going to get started so we don't waste time.
Let's see. When you go to new share, can you do desktop? I don't know how Mac works.
So according to what I'm seeing, it says that I'm sharing. It's asking me, it says I'm sharing. I can see the participants. It's giving me the option to stop sharing. It says pause, remote control, stop video, mute. I mean, it on my end, it looks like I'm sharing. It's giving me the option to record it, to disable the attendee annotation. So I've got all of the stuff that I should have.
So I don't know, because I couldn't see her screen either, but I went to the top to view options, and it says I can view Dr. Lamb's screen or Lisa's screen. So I chose Lisa's, and now I can see it.
Yep, same thing.
Okay.
That worked for me.
Thanks, Tracy.
My pleasure.
Okay, so should we start, or are we still waiting for folks?
Tell me that again, Tracy. Let me see if I can do it.
So up at the top of your screen where it says view options, if you click on that, then it says that I can view either your screen or Lisa's screen. And I just chose Lisa's instead.
I don't have a view options.
At the top of your screen, it's not there until you kind of wave your pointer over it, and it'll be a green tab and a gray-black tab. Those view options. One says you're sharing your screen, and the other says view options. You click that, you can choose between the two screens.
Yeah, like you have to move your mouse around quite a bit up there for it to pop up.
No, I'm not getting anything like that.
Does everybody else have us up, or is anybody still struggling?
Just me, I think.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Okay.
Well,
So-
excuse me, before you can start, Lisa, can you send the PowerPoint to Dr. Lamb so he can follow it?
I can, yeah, it's going to take me a minute to share it with him, but yeah, I can do that.
You can do that later. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, so to introduce ourselves, we are presenting the case study of measuring organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. I'm Lisa Thompson, and with me today are Daryl Hilton and Sheila Person-Scott. So our objectives for this case were to understand the complex issue of measuring the organizational effectiveness of a nonprofit in the nonprofit sector, and to understand and recognize the tensions between the business-like approaches to organizational development and holistic approaches to service provision, and to also learn more about what social construct is of organizational effectiveness.
Okay, so with the executive summary and the background of participants, I'm not going to necessarily read through every single one because we all did the same case study, but some of the key participants in the roles were definitely Luke, which is an old college friend of the author, and the director of the CAN. They have researchers and authors of the article, Dr. Herman, Dr. Rands from the University of Missouri, Dr. Lewis, Lucinda Beckett, Larry Schell, and Roderick Buffkin. which runs the large homeless shelter. And then there are also some other key stakeholders, such as the board of directors, the community that CAN serves, donors, staff, and just some of the organizational background is CAN is a large collaborative, CAN is the Community Action Network, which is a large collaboration of nonprofit org and government agencies that work on social services and community development, located not too far from where I am now, Texas. And so as we were developing this presentation, we thought that it would be necessary and effective for us to define what a social construction is, or organizational effectiveness is from our perspective. So what we found was that a social construct is the perception of an individual, group, or idea through the cultural or social practice. And we said organizational culture is an example of that by looking and saying that effectiveness is only quote unquote real when people believe and act as if the effectiveness is real. And so then we took it to say, well, what is organizational effectiveness? And we said that that is the concept of how effective an organization is in achieving the outcomes in which it says that it was going to do. So basically, is the organization doing what it says it's going to do? And then also we look at organizational effectiveness. Groups and organizations directly concern themselves with several key areas, which are the metrics, accountability, communication, delivery systems, human performance, and leadership. And as you see on the right, there is a there is a picture that depicts those different key areas and how all of those play into each other to affect the organizational effectiveness. And so the introduction and the overview of the key issues. So the director of CAN, Luke, he recognized the pressure points for the organization due to social safety net changes. CAN's partner organizations are rethinking their relationships with current funding sources, such as private foundations and government grants, as well as the competition for those resources is getting fierce. So it's becoming more competitive to get the resources that used to be very easy for them to receive. Some of the key issues that we found was a need to create a report about measuring what organizational effectiveness is in the nonprofit sector, inform the partners of effectiveness, and allow them to make funding and or sourcing decisions from an informed place of decision. To report created by an outside entity to increase credibility through unbiased lens with the stakeholders. Data provided by CAN to the consultants, all qualitative, so that's articles, contact, newspaper clippings, etc. Need significant research with local experts. Develop an understanding of nonprofit effectiveness comparison. And basically saying that there's no universally applicable best practices for nonprofit managers' effectiveness related to the robustness of the social construction. And how do you measure achievement? How do you measure the responsiveness? It's also a key issue. And then also there's a need for explicit and unique forms of communication to the actual community partners and stakeholders. And then as you see on the right side, we talk about the different measurements. So how does the performance of the organization tie into the strategic plan or the mission? How are nonprofits affected to the extent that they are fulfilling the mission? And how can this be measured? How can a SWOT analysis help with effectiveness measures? And is there a quality practice to make sure that organizations are meeting the mark?
So the central problems that we're finding is difficult to create effectiveness measures. The problem that was quoted was that things are easy to measure are not always the most important things for nonprofits. Example, budget, materials, resources compared to quality of services, quality of life. Organizational effectiveness is based on social constructs. So, of course, the beliefs and actions of others affect the central problems, risks, and losses. And then the funding decreases and the needs are increasing. And there's no universal standardized criteria to measure effectiveness. Must differentiate between types of nonprofit organizations. Of course, the long-term risks are the loss over time of the partnerships within the CAN hub if they can't fund and support their participation, which trickles down to loss of services for the community, burden on individual social service organizations that are outside of the CAN, and then the fracture of services for those at-risk populations of individuals that lose those services. short term, we've got a loss of momentum possibility in the funding and support, which is much harder to build back if that is abandoned. Meaning that once you have groups that are kind of used to giving, if you lose those, it's really hard to get them, much harder to get them back than to maintain that momentum. There is also a possibility of not speaking to the right audience. And if the report is not robust and contains that compelling supporting information, it can look like CAN is kind of flaky and they don't have solid governance, and that it's not worth the risk of continued and increased financial or fiscal support. So there's some secondary issues and problems. CAN's mission is implicit, not explicitly stated. So that is an issue, because in order to measure effectiveness of the organization, that mission is the bar against which measurements must be created. Those measurements can be seen as very subjective, if not well defined. Correct measurement practices don't always result in improved organizational effectiveness, because best practices can change over time, or the consideration of what those best practices can be. Social construct influences that organizational effectiveness, as Daryl went over before. The downturn requires creative funding resources and effective communication. And as we get into communication, sometimes communication is very misunderstood. It constitutes critical relationships through those understandings between the organizations and the community that it serves. And the communications can become more or less stable. It's critical because those notions of effectiveness exist within that communication and within that social construct.
The evidentiary support and assumptions is that nonprofit organizational effectiveness should be assessed by multiple indicators. And an example of that is, I don't know if you're familiar with the urban ministry. Their mission is to end homelessness one person at a time. However, they do a lot to support the homeless. They have the room at the inn where churches and other organizations will put up the homeless a few months, the winter months. They have feeding, they have showers in their facility for people to come in and take showers. They have laundry, they have counselors on staff. They also have mailboxes so that the homeless can get, some of them are on Social Security or disability, so they have mailboxes for their mails to be delivered, because you need an address or a P.O. box to get your check. So that they can lead. In addition to that, they also have some services where they engage the homeless. They actually don't call them homeless, they call them neighbors. But they engage the neighbors, and they have an international soccer team, sports team, where they have people who have played, who are without homes but are good at soccer, so they have some physical activities for them. And they also, during the holiday season, they have art, and they have an artist create their Christmas card. And they take donations for those and have individuals, the individual gets part of the proceeds for that. So that's one thing. Lisa, you moved the slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was reading your notes from the next one and it sounded like you were there. I apologize.
No. So the other thing I want to talk about in this is that in a nonprofit organizational effectiveness study by David Renz and Robert Henry, they underscore that it's necessary for nonprofits to have multiple criteria of effectiveness. And they did a 2-time study which shows a strong relationship between stakeholder judgment and organizational effectiveness. And in that those studies, they did it twice. And while the correlation is lower in the second study, it actually had a stronger correlation, and that is because there were variables that impacted that. There was a smaller number, and some of the individuals did not follow the practices that they put in place. And in the research, they also found that the board members impact donor judgment. So if the donors feel like you have a strong board, then that impacts the donors' judgment more than internal board practices. Okay, Lisa.
Okay.
So as you look at this preferred solutions and rationale, there are 6 things that we say that we need to analyze the key issues in the community that need attention and correspond then to the mission of CAN. We need to identify and prioritize the current partnerships within the Community Action Network, CAN, by what they currently provide against the current needs of the community, the social construction, and current projected funding needs to continue services. So here we have both qualitative and quantitative data that we need to analyze. We need to measure the organization's current state through a SWOT analysis, because we really need to look at particularly what are the threats and what are the opportunities that happen, and of course the weaknesses. We need to create a projected needs of service plan to address community and future needs. Now this will need to be looked at continuously because you know, as things happen in our communities, the service need will change. So for instance, right now there's, you know, a lot in the communities about dreamers and the needs to support dreamers. You know, 12 months ago, that wasn't a big concern. So we'll need to, that plan will need to be fluid. We need to analyze communications and create a plan for consistent and innovative communications so that we can communicate to the donors quarterly and create standardized decisions of success measures for CAN. Now, some of these will be qualitative, some of these will be quantitative, but also if we engage the donors in support of those success measures by meeting with them regularly, we will know, or at least have an idea of what they're looking for. So in this other box, we have short-term and underneath we have short-term and long-term strategies. So I've talked about the SWOT, the board membership. One of the things that we thought was important is to make sure that staff can articulate the mission of the organization and understand their role in the success of the organization. So a lot of times we look externally to donors or we look externally to our partners, but we need to really make sure the staff is on board. And then eliminate practices that are not in alignment with the mission of the organization. So if there's things that you are doing that are not moving you toward your mission or goals, then you may need to consider to eliminate them. In longer term, establish critical partners within the city, state, business, nonprofit, and religious communities. And again, that's using the urban ministry as an example. That's one of the things that they have done. They have partnerships with the housing authority, state governments, other groups that they work with to ensure that the homeless have wraparound services. They need to incorporate findings from the SWOT analysis into their strategic plan, regularly assess the social construct. That will be an ongoing thing, particularly, you know, giving economic downturns, and also regularly assess the formal and non-communication and come up with some creative communication strategies. Again, using Urban Ministries, they have a quarterly newsletter that goes out to all of their donors that talks about what they've done each quarter, the successes, and even some of the challenges they're facing. So when we look at alternative solutions, we thought, well, we could partner with the University of Texas to create an internship program to have an intern focus on unique and creative, non-traditional, out-of-the-box community strategies. For them to propose a model of an advisory board, advisory board for critical stakeholders. So, you know, let's get some people who can work with us to kind of advise of what's going on in the community, survey donors to get feedback. The thing for this intern is they'll have the opportunity to, we're looking at a communications major that would have an opportunity to practice their skills like we are doing with our nonprofits or businesses that we're supporting. So it's a win-win for both. Use the best practices of other nonprofit organizations And the other thing we can do is do nothing and take the chance that the mission supports the social construction of the organizations and can. So when we look at our time action plan for implementation, we will analyze the organizational mission against activities, both quantitative and quantitative measures. We'll identify areas of ineffectiveness and institute strategies to address consistent and inconsistent measures. And we will implement strategies and measure effectiveness quarterly to ensure success can be achieved. Because the social construction can change, we need to have a regular, regularly review that we're on track. So some of the risks is that the quantitative data needs to be reliable and valid to ensure the findings are conclusive. So again, in the article, it talked about some of these measures are not necessarily seen by donors as important. So we need to make sure that we are getting the right quantitative measures. There may be resistance to the qualitative data from individuals who do not see that type of measurement as important or valid. So we need to find a way to identify the needs, and we need to make sure that there's support in those from our donors. Well, I should just say donors, they're stakeholders. When identifying the areas of ineffectiveness, the wrong areas may be identified. So again, we really need to be clear and crisp on where are we ineffective, and solicit feedback on that. If the wrong areas are identified, the wrong strategies will be implemented. So that's why it's so critical for us to make sure we have the right areas identified. And if there's not a total buy-in to the mission of the organization, the stakeholders won't support the outcome of the analysis of CAN's effectiveness.
Okay, so what are some of the predicted outcomes? So we're saying from all of this information that was previously shared, some of the predicted outcomes are going to be increased effectiveness perception through the development of performance metrics. We said the mission will drive alignment of actions to effectiveness measurement. There will be increased understanding of the importance and maintenance of effective communication systems to constitute relationships in and between partner organizations. And then lastly, long-term sustainment of CAN's wraparound community services via clarity for funding, process for measurement, and partnership procurement, and processes of community needs analysis. So that's what we said what the predicted outcomes would be if these solutions were to be implemented. And then last but not least, below the predicted outcomes are the links to the learning objectives with the essential Q&A as well. So we're not going to go through that specifically, but that's just there for your information.
And those are our references. And of course, we would love to know if you have any questions. And if not, we have completed our presentation.
Excellent work. All right, to summarize, as a consultant, you've been called in to consult. You have two primary functions in this case study. First is to develop quantitative methodology to do a common assessment of the numbers of organizations. That can be done a one-size-fits-all kind of assessment. SWOT's a good one to use, but in the end, you're going to develop a quantitative metric, a measure of some sort, or multiple measures in the quantitative realm to measure all the organizations. But then your job as a consultant would be to facilitate each individual organization partnering with their stakeholders to develop qualitative measures, a social construct of what they see as important. So half of the equation, you can make a common assessment on the quantitative side. The issue with this particular case study is you can't do that with qualitative. Qualitative defines itself as you gather data, and it's specific to each individual organization. you can't just come up with a metric for qualitative. It doesn't exist. That's the issue in this case study, and that's what you're supposed to learn is that in social construct theory, it's individual to the organization. There is no common tool on qualitative. And you'd have to then partner, have each individual organization, you'd facilitate the partnership with their stakeholders to develop that qualitative measure or that qualitative information gathering. And so, again, what you're supposed to learn from this case study is that qualitative does not produce or does not lend itself to quantitative measures. They're completely different. So you have two tasks as the consultant here. One is to develop that simple metric on the quantitative side, but the other is you facilitate the development of a social construct between the organization and its stakeholders. There is no magic bullet. There is no document. There is no metric. That has to be developed, and it will be different for every organization. That's why qualitative work is much harder. It's longer. It's less defined. It defines itself as you don't walk into a qualitative with a predetermined routine. The data that you collect determines the direction that you go and determines the outcomes. You approach them very differently. Qualitative, you don't start out with a hypothesis in mind or a specific set of of actions in mind. The data that you collect defines that as you go. It's kind of backwards from quantitative. And that's why you have to be careful to keep your methodology clean for each of those. The methodologies are exactly opposite from quantitative to qualitative. And that's what I've hoped you've learned through this one, and I believe that you have. Excellent job. All right, I'm going to reclaim host and see if I can make.
Is there anything I need to do?
I think that I can. I think I can reclaim host.
If I click stop share, maybe.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I have reclaimed the host. And let me see if I can. Who's going to go next? Who's going to do the next presentation?
We can go next.
So who's going to be the host now?
It was supposed to be Jackie, but she has a Mac, so we're going to have it, or I'll try.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike. And if Mike can't do it, then I can still try it on mine.
Okay. All right. I have made Mike the host.
I am now the host. All right. Can everybody see?
I can see you, Mike.
Yes, I could see.
Yes.
Wonderful. That was easy.
Not me.
So everyone besides Dr. Lamb can see it?
I'm good.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Would you like us to send the link to you, sir, or you want us to go?
Go right ahead. Just
okay. All right. Jackie, would you like to lead us off?
I'm here. I had to get my cord. I was about to lose power.
Nope.
Can you guys see me? Somehow my video went away.
If you click on the little box and it says show thumbnail, you can see everybody.
I can see you, Tracy.
I can see you.
Okay, I just can't see myself. That's okay. Are we ready?
Thanks.
go right ahead.
All right.
Okay.
So we are the second group. So for time's sakes, we're going to jump right into the case study. There are 4 of us, Jackie, myself, Tracy, and Courtney. Courtney is not here today for travel purposes. but we're still going to cover her information that she provided to us. So I will leave this, I will hand this off, and we're going to get started with the summary of the case real quick.
Okay, so I will go over the summary. We've kind of touched on all of these anyway, so I'll keep it brief for everyone's benefit. But we all know we're talking about the Community Action Network, which is a collaboration of nonprofit organizations and agencies that work in the city of Austin, Texas. As we've mentioned, unemployment is up, so money and available services are down due to budget cuts and tax revenues, and they're receiving pressure from the funders to measure their organizational effectiveness. Our key players are Luke Sorsen, who's the director, who actually hired our team to be the consultant, and he actually provided us with some materials to get started, such as the articles, newspaper clippings, and the contact list. As Daryl mentioned earlier, we have other key players such as Lucinda Beckett, who's the director of the United Way, who also happens to be a member of the CAN executive team, which is helpful here because she has two perspectives. And then we have Larry Schell, who's the director of the Austin Foundation, who kind of brings an interesting perspective to the case study, as he has a business background, so he actually runs his foundation that way. And we'll talk later about kind of the differences in those opinions. And then Roderick Birkin, who's the director of the local homeless shelter, who does have a difference of opinion than Larry Schell, as he doesn't think things should be ran business-like. As we mentioned, we did have some information from several professors, and I've just kind of in the table here kind of summarized what their thoughts are about measuring organizational effectiveness. And you'll see that Herman and Renz talked about that it's multidimensional, that you need to compare things, that you need a correct management practice. But the problem is, as you guys all read, that no one really knows what the correct management practice is. And then the one that we'll focus on the most is the social construction. And then Dr. Lewis, very similar, talks a lot about the social construction and the communication and the understanding throughout the interaction within the organization, and how all of that aligns with the mission. And so you can use those things to measure the effectiveness.
So we've talked a little bit about the learning objectives, but I'll just go through them quickly. I won't belabor this too long, but the objectives for the case were to help you understand the complicated issue of measuring organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector, to recognize the tensions in the nonprofit sector between business-like approaches to organization development and more holistic approaches to service provision, and then lastly, to learn more about the role of communication and the social construction of organizational effectiveness. And so on the next slide, I just lifted a couple of things from the case that, just hold true and just show the objectives. So one of the quotes was, all nonprofits want to do good work, but we must demonstrate to others that we are actually doing good work and that our organizations are effective. And then lastly, we have to be able to measure and demonstrate our organizational effectiveness to other stakeholders, especially funding agencies. So I thought that those were really good to lift from the case, just to demonstrate those objectives.
So from the overall case study, so we took this more on the numbers side and not necessarily the qualitative side. So before we jump into that, there are two things that were brought up that we could potentially look at, but we decided not to. The first one was expansion, so our ability to grow as an organization. But a prime example of how that can be really bad for us is Starbucks, where when Howard Schultz, the CEO, originally retired, the next CEO who came in, he tried to expand the organization really, really fast, and they ended up having a lot of issues with that when it came to control, when it came to policy management, and even just the overall situation. So we ended up saying that expansion of our organization is not a good thing. And then the other one that we wanted to talk about that we didn't really want to work with is the number of time people come back. So when the actual people that we're helping, yes, we're trying to target how many people we're actually able to engage, but if they're coming back to us, is that really that effective? So what we ended up working with are 5 main recommendations, and that's impressions, so total number of people or associates that we were helped or influenced. Revenue through cost savings, so we are having a little bit of issue with the actual economy itself, so people's willingness to share money. So what is it we can do as an organization to shave off some of that money year over year? So if we, as an organization, it costs $300,000, what can we do to decrease that overall cost? total donations received, so money. That's very simple. But then we did want to track donor total, so total number of donors, and then the total number of new donors. And that right there can kind of help express or talk about whether or not we're able to meet that organizational effectiveness, if you will. So the ability to really get our name out there. Do they see our purpose? Do they like our purpose? Are we getting new folks who are interested in it? But then are we also retaining the people who are donating to us? So are we proving to our current donors that we're sticking to our purpose? So what exactly does it mean for organizational effectiveness? Like Darryl mentioned, I also want to expand a little bit. So it's vision, mission, objectives, and overall related. So we can have our vision, we can have our mission and our objectives, but if we don't actually follow through with anything that we're saying, us as an organization, are we actually going to prove what we're trying to do? So everything that we're trying to work with, making sure that it actually relates to what we're trying to say. And how would you explain this in your report? So success is based on mission and perceived ability to execute that mission. So like we mentioned before with the 5 recommendations, we wanted to talk about the total number of donors and the total number of new donors. And if we're losing our current donors, obviously we're not showing the actual mission or the perceived execution of that mission. So trying to capture that in those 2 specific metrics. Value systems in place on principles and perceived purpose, and then all of our SMART goals, so everything that we're trying to accomplish within the year or through our strategic action, is it actually relating to our organizational purpose? Again, if it's not, why are we doing it? And then why is it that we're continuing doing those tests? So when it comes to performance metrics, like we mentioned the last 2 slides, but wanted to spell that out one more time. So the ability to maintain current donors, increase our number of donors year over year. So brand awareness, we believe that with the actual donors itself, with the people that we're able to get out into the community and actually make a difference in their lives, we'll show a little bit more of that brand awareness. And then the actual total number of community engagement. So how many people or impressions we're allowed to give within our community. So that just kind of simple or following the same concepts as how Twitter quantifies impressions, just the total number of people. Are we able to expand that and are able to reach more people? And if an important aspect of the nonprofit organization's work cannot be quantified, how else could it be potentially measured? And that's awareness and education of purpose. So are we getting out there in the community? How many actual events are we doing? The reputation and perception of the organization. So same thing when it comes to potentially developing a like a quantitative survey or whatnot, but again, that's not our main recommendations here. And then sampling the population for influence. So I'm going through and seeing if there's a way to capture that as well. But that is also if this cannot work, which we're hoping that it does and can make a very good qualitative statements through quantitative information. So one of the things that we wanted to kind of bring up is what is it that us, or what is it that myself, what organization do I work with and why do I like them? And one of the places I donate to is the Huntsman's Cancer Institute in Salt Lake City, Utah. I've been there. I really enjoyed just everything when it came to, just the placement of where all the rooms were at, how it felt, but also the way that they tell us that they use money. So when they talk about how they use their money, it's applied only towards the purpose of the organization. So they promise every person who that donates to them that their finance or whatever they donate is actually going to go towards the actual research itself. So anything that could potentially be not people's salaries, not people's travel expenses, it's going right towards buying beakers or working with chemicals and that stuff. So it works, it shows kind of that social awareness and morality using like the organizational structure. So that's just one example for why I choose this and why is it that I choose this. As a donor, I support and I want an organization to be held to a higher moral standard. So, I want them to be using the money I provide for what I think they're trying to do. So their purpose is obviously to cure cancer. They were the sites or the research center that started coming up with the the gene related to breast cancer and colon cancer. So trying to come up with potential family gene related. So they were one of the leaders with that. And then they report out financially. So reporting out financial responsibility. No one has an absurd amount of money when it comes to their salary. Everyone is, in a nonprofit sector. There's no outliers there. And how will you know if the process and outcomes of this organization are successful? What is the purpose, and what is my perception of the organizational brand? So right now I hold this place into a higher standard, just based on what I've seen, the tours that I've gone on, and the way that they express, the way they use that finance or their money. So right now it doesn't report any type of waste, in my opinion. So that's why I think that's successful. So the primary objectives, I'm sorry?
Oh, no. Do you want me to take that slide, Mike, or do you want to take it?
I'm sorry, go ahead. I got ahead of myself.
Oh, no, it's okay. So just relating some of this back to the answers, it actually made me think a lot about my experience working in the nonprofit sector, because even though you have a very a heartstring type situation that you're in with most nonprofits, it still has a very just business-like approach that you have to take. Nonprofits are very revenue driven. In spite of the good that they do, there still has to be a lot of things that take place from a business perspective and a revenue perspective. So as we were looking at the objectives, it made me think a lot about that. And then also just thinking about how effective an organization is when you're looking at the awareness that's raised around the particular topic and how well the organization is doing and the public perception. That was also something that was related to our objectives as well.
So we've talked about most of these things very similar to the group before us, but our central problem, as we all clearly understand, is that we need to measure the organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. We're getting pressure from our funders to do this, and we've got to figure out a way to do so, and Mike has kind of presented some ways in which we think we could do that. We do have some secondary problems, such as the nonprofit organizations are interested in impacting things that are difficult to quantify. So we've got to figure out how we can measure those things. And then, like we mentioned before, that there's a bit of a strain in the nonprofit sector about how to actually run nonprofits, and should they be business-like so that they're efficient and productive, or should we take a more holistic approach that focuses on our quality, but not necessarily just looking hard at those numbers. So trying to find a nice blend of those both that appeals to everyone so we can measure that effectiveness. Supporting information, we've already talked about all of these things. It's just some research from Dr. Lewis, as well as some comments from Lucinda Beckett. So I'm not going to read those to you, as we've touched on most of them.
So going through just one last time. So when it comes to our recommendations, like we mentioned, it's very trying to balance that quantitative versus qualitative. We're a nonprofit versus, are we in the private sector? We're not saying that it has to be driven exactly by the numbers, but the numbers will tell that qualitative story that they're looking for. So when it comes to just impressions, donor retention, and the finance that's coming in and out, making sure that we keep that on track. So when it comes to our references, just a couple here if anyone's interested in the website, and then obviously the case study as well. Any questions?
Very good. A note here, Mike referenced the Huntsman Cancer Institute. And when he talked about how he wants them to see their money spent, not paying salaries and travel and those kinds of things, what he is in effect saying is that I want to see them fulfill their mission. Their mission is cancer research, not salaries and travel. So it goes back to the social construction theory that at that particular the qualitative measure has to be specific to the mission of each individual organization. Again, it supports the notion that quantitative, we can come up with a metric to apply to all of them for our numbers. But qualitative it's in the qualitative metric is or measure has to be individual to that organization's mission. That is the heart of the social construct theory. And Mike outlined it very well using Huntsman as the example. He expects in that particular organization, the mission drives that social construct theory. And his example was, I want to see them using the money to buy beakers and chemicals rather than paying travel and salaries. Again, back to their mission of research to find a cure for cancer. So as he has highlighted so aptly there for us, the qualitative can't be a one-size-fits-all. It's driven by the mission of the organization. So perfect example that qualitative has to be individualized to each individual organization. The quantitative metric can be the same for everybody, but the qualitative has to be individual. Okay, very good. I was actually able to get that screen up and working, so we got some of that recorded. Very good. All right. Who's going to be the next host? Sheldon? Katie? Welcome. So let me go to participants. Who's going to be our next host?
Katie.
Katie's going to be our next host. Yeah. So I'm going to make Katie the host.
Okay.
Have you claimed the host, Katie?
Let me see. I'm not seeing the option. Can you guys tell me where I need to look to claim the host?
Go to participants on your toolbar.
Mm-hmm.
When you click on that,
Mm-hmm.
It should give you the option to claim host.
It says that I'm the host.
There you go.
You guys see my screen?
No.
Mm-mm.
No, click share screen at the bottom.
Okay. 1 second. Share screen at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, guys. I am not seeing share screen. Let's see. Yeah, I see it.
It says you have started screen sharing. There it goes. Okay.
Sorry about that. Okay, so our team is myself, Katie, Terrence, and Sheldon, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about case study 738, which is measuring organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. The contents of our presentation include the facts of the case, the learning objectives, the central problem, secondary problems, solutions, plan for implementation, and we'll take your questions at the end. So I will turn it over to Terrence now to give you some background for the case.
Well, to avoid being redundant, we all are familiar with this case, but we're going to move to our learning objectives. We can go to slide 5. Kate, if you can pull up slide 5.
This one, Terrence?
Yeah, slide 5.
I'm sorry, I can't see the slide numbers from my...
Oh, learning objectives, I'm sorry.
The learning objectives?
Yes.
Okay, can you guys see that slide up? That's what I'm looking at on my screen. No.
No. Can you double click it?
Hold on 1 second. My screen is slide 5 now.
You're going to have to go back to share screen.
Uh-huh.
Go back to share screen and or go to new share.
Uh-huh.
And then click back on, there you go.
There we go. So the learning objectives of this particular case study, they're to understand the complicated issue of measuring organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. Also to recognize the balance between quantitative and qualitative measurements in nonprofit organizations, and to understand and recognize role of communication, interaction, and social construction among all stakeholders in organizational effectiveness. So when we looked at this case, we identified the central problem, and as it has already been alluded to, how to measure organizational effectiveness in a nonprofit organization or agency in a way that is agreed upon all stakeholders. Members of the executive board have different opinions on the business model, practical versus idealistic, and a central problem in this case is finding a balance between the two to demonstrate efficacy across the board and the stakeholders. We also considered some secondary problems. These secondary problems are the problems that can arise if we really do not provide a good solution to the central problem. So some of the secondary problems could possibly be a loss of funding. There may be a struggle with maintaining relationships and engagement of all the stakeholders and board members. Could be a loss of stakeholders, depending on the pressure of funders. Organizations feel pressure to deviate from the mission. You may have some members that prefer the nonprofit to be run as a business rather than a charity. And again, that secondary problem could be efficiency and efficacy. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Sheldon.
Yeah, Terrence mentioned stakeholders, and we've defined stakeholders as any and every group or constituency that may be impacted by the organization's decisions, the organization's actions, and or the organization's outcome. Some of the stakeholders of the organization would be their employees, who certainly have a direct impact and are impacted directly by the organization. The community, which is why the nonprofits actually exist, and certainly the customers and the clients that the nonprofit is serving. The board members also have a direct impact on the organization, and so they're certainly a very important stakeholder. Thus, as donors, the government certainly can make changes or rulings regarding nonprofit status, how they are to be treated. So they certainly can impact the organization. What the organization's competitors are doing, they're certainly a stakeholder. Media, suppliers, social, political action groups, etc. The challenge that we found when we looked at the stakeholders is that all of the stakeholders have different expectations and have a different interest in the nonprofit. And so, for example, when you look at employees, sometimes employees are motivated by the mission of the organization. There are certainly one interest of theirs may be the benefits that the organization gives to the community, as well as the benefits that they receive as employees, particularly pay and compensation. The community measurement may be what impact is this organization actually having on the community? And then, of course, clients and customers, what impact is the organization having on their lives? Are they being transformed by the work of the nonprofit? Board members sometimes lean more heavily towards operational excellence and efficiency. They're looking at how their resources are being utilized because they're certainly supporting the organization from a financial standpoint. So sometimes you will see a big push for operational and efficiency excellence with certain board members and donors. And of course, the government, whether you're getting grants from the government or whether you are basically operating based on the certain regulations or rules with 501c3 that governs nonprofits. So the real issue here is that as we're looking at trying to come up with a measurement, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, we have to consider that stakeholders are going to vary based on their interests. So Terrence mentioned what the central problem was. So here are a few of the solutions that we thought that might impact and solve part of the problem. One potential solution is to design a quantitatively measured solution that will focus primarily on how efficient and effective the organization is running. And particularly when you think about the fact that an organization cannot exist without resources. And so if you don't have money, you don't have financial support, organizations certainly can go out of business. So one solution may be to design a measurement for the organization that makes the organization viable and keeps the organization alive. So that's one approach. Another approach is to design a qualitatively measured solution that's really mission-driven based on what the organization's purpose is, and making sure that you're targeting and that you are transforming and that all of your measurements align with the mission. And the theory behind this approach is that if you're actually hitting that matrix, if you are transforming, and if you are fulfilling your mission, you are actually serving your purpose. And certainly there are pros and cons to all of these recommendations, but that would be the second approach. And the third approach solution would be to kind of combine both the quantitative and the qualitative measurement based on social construction that will respond to all of the needs of the various stakeholders in the organization and outside the organization. So the approach that we think that is preferred, that we'd like to recommend, would be the third approach, which is a hybrid system. And this hybrid approach would be a measurement that is both quantitative and qualitative, combined with all of the interests of the stakeholders. And so we certainly have to validate with each and every stakeholder what their primary interests are. So we don't want to assume that, and it's going to vary from organization to organization. So we don't want to assume that all board members or all donors will just be focused on financial matrix. They may also have a qualitative measurement. So we want to make sure we validate what those interests and measurements that they'd like to see and make it more of a hybrid approach. So we would consistently measure this through social construction and how the stakeholders are responding. And, when we talk about social construction, social construction is basically looking at how effective the actions are of the stakeholders, whether it's actually real to the stakeholders. Now will be measured based on how they respond. Because certainly just devising a measurement and you're not seeing the responsiveness or the interactions and the communications between the various stakeholders, then your measurement, will probably be ineffective. So we'd like to regularly engage all of the stakeholders to make sure that we are meeting their needs, that the measurements are meeting their needs, and have constructive dialogue with them. And so for this to happen, communication is going to need to be happen on a consistent basis. People are going to have to be open, and this is going to have to be multi-dimensional. And as I said earlier, that's what social construction is all about, making sure that you've got actions and responsiveness to the various measurements. And the measurement is just not a measurement that's out there, but it's not really engaging all of the various stakeholders. So that would be our approach, would be to recommend a hybrid approach. And we certainly want to have a very deliberate plan for implementing this. And I'm going to turn it over to Katie to talk about how we would go about implementing this approach.
So when we were looking at our plan for implementation, we referred to the text program evaluation. And our hybrid model is actually a mixed methods model that we're looking to use. And we referred to the case study in the book of Big Brothers and Big Sisters of America. And they used in-depth interviewing to get some anecdotal evidence and to really get into the nuts and bolts of how the stakeholders and the people involved with the organization viewed how well they were being or how effective they were being. So for our case, we wanted to use interviewing as well as a valid measurement tool like surveys to really look at the mission, anecdotal evidence, management practices as it relates to social construction and the organizational responsiveness. In the case study, the literature review said that it indicated that we needed to provide insight on 3 levels of analysis: interpersonal, group, and organizational. So we wanted to administer this survey tool and interviewing to the stakeholders, partners, and board members and employees that are involved with the organization to really get a good qualitative, consistent indicator for efficacy there. And so our quantitative approach, we wanted to look at budget reports, number of people served, number of volunteer hours, contributions in the form of grants, donors, and fundraising, resources allocated. And then we wanted to combine these two, the outcomes of these 2 measurements to really analyze and figure out what are the areas or opportunities for improvement. We also wanted to look at national and statewide benchmarks to measure how our organization is doing in comparison to similar organizations across the state or across the country. And so after we have collected and analyzed this data, like I mentioned before, we're going to identify areas for opportunity based on the key objectives. Does the mission need to be clarified or strengthened? Does communication need to be improved? Are management practices being upheld to the standard? And then from these indicators, we're going to develop appropriate interventions. And there's our reference. And do you guys have any questions?
I like your light bulb.
It was Sheldon's idea. I can't take the credit for it.
Sheldon, I like the light bulb.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
All right. I have a question. I muted myself here. You mentioned employees. Is there a difference in the characteristics of paid employees versus volunteer employees?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A difference in terms of how we will account for them or in terms of their behavior? Just want to clarify the question.
Behavior.
Okay. Yes, there can be. Sometimes with one of the things you do know with volunteer employees is that their actions, are basically optional. So they've decided to participate because they want to participate. Some people that work, whether it's not-for-profit or for-profit organizations, they're there because they're being paid. For the most part, you do know there's a high tendency with people that are volunteering. They're volunteering because they want to be there and they want to make a difference. So
they agree with the mission, or they support the mission. Is that what you're saying?
They highly support the mission. And
their motivation is they support the mission, as Mike said with Huntsman. He supports their mission.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So when you're collecting your data, your quantitative data, should you distinguish between paid and unpaid employees when you're collecting data? And when you start your analysis?
I would say yes.
I could see that, yes. Mm-hmm.
That would be. So this is a practical question. When you're working on your consultancy and you're out with partnering with your organization, you need to always view the data and feedback that you get through the lens of, is this a paid employee who has different motivations than a volunteer whose characteristics are much more of those of other stakeholders who support the organization? They're more interested in the mission than they are the paycheck, because they're not getting a paycheck. So this speaks to population and sample. It speaks to validity and reliability. You need to, when you're doing your quantitative methodology, you need to clearly define the difference. They're two separate groups. Let me say that again. Volunteer and paid employees are two separate groups. So in your data collection methodology of population and sample, they are different sample groups. Everybody understand that? That's an important distinction in quantitative work. They are not just one group. They are two separate groups, and you should treat them as such in data collection. Excellent presentation. I just wanted to bring that point forward. I just kind of saved that. And so if, Katie, if you will make me host again.
If I can figure out how here.
Okay. Yeah, she sent me that. All right. So let me go to participants and reclaim host. Come on, you can do it. Reclaim host. Share screen. Desktop, share screen. All right. So let's go back to, let me see if we can go back to, so really our recommendations, and all of you nailed it, good job, is that you've got to collect quantitative and qualitative method data or information. Data on the quantitative side, information on the qualitative side. That you have to do both. This is mixed methodology. Being clear when we talk about personnel on the quantitative side, that paid and unpaid workers or employees are different groups. And so we would, if we're doing representative sampling, if we have a large organization where we can't actually gather data from everyone, we need to remember that paid and unpaid are different groups if we're doing representative sample, and that we need to collect data from each of those and treat that data separately because they're not the same group. But this kind of summarizes, I like this one, this kind of summarizes what you need to do. You need to do a qualitative piece and you need to do a quantitative piece. Remembering that the qualitative piece You can design a metric or an instrument that's kind of a one-size-fits-all. You cannot do that with qualitative. It's individual to the mission of each organization, and that is the heart of the social construct. That qualitative information is only specific to that organization, and you can't generalize it beyond that organization. The whole point of quantitative work is that you take a sample out of the population, and a representative sample, and that you can generalize to other organizations. That's what you're going to be able to do with that one metric or one measure. Can't do that on the qualitative side. It only that data, that information that you get, that qualitative data is only relevant to that specific organization. That's the way qualitative works. Quantitative is broad. We sample a population in order to be able to speak to a larger population. We do not do that with qualitative. That information is only specific to that organization. That, folks, is the heart of the difference between qualitative and quantitative methodology. This is in practice the difference between qualitative and quantitative, and that's why we start with this. If you can understand those two distinctions, it gets a lot easier doing research and evaluation, applying analytics to organizations, if you understand the difference. That you can't mix the two. They're separate. They derive separate purposes. And that's what I hope that you got from this activity. Let's look quickly. I see we've got 6 minutes left. Let me go to a new share here, go to my desktop, share screen, get out of this one, get out of that one, get back here. If I lose you, I'll get you back. All right, everybody should be able to see what I have on the screen. All right. This was week 4, February 5 through 11. We're home on Saturday, February the 10th for case study 16. Next week, you will be at home. You will be at home for the next 2 weeks doing your discussion boards. One of the reasons I brought this up, don't get too far behind on these. Some of you are I don't have a weekly turn-in policy. Your adults don't need one, but don't get too far behind on catching up your task and your discussion board. Some of you are doing great. Some of you not so much. You know who you are. Our next face-to-face session is February the 20th, on the week of February 26th through March 4th. We will be at Charlotte on Saturday and Sunday, March 3rd and 4th, and then we'll have a spring break week. So what that does is it gives you 2 weeks again before your next case study is due on the 17th. Same process. We'll reverse the order in terms of how the groups go next time. Remember, the Zoom master rotates to the second person on the list. And then you have discussion boards, a holiday, and then face-to-face. Just as a reminder, the way the semester works out, you from our face-to-face, the very next week, you'll need to be quick about getting together your case study data gathering. Then you'll have, again, 2 weeks before the last one. It's just the way the semester worked out. I try to give you 2 weeks to work on these, but you're only going to have 1 week between us meeting and your PowerPoint being due on that one. So just be aware that you're going to have to be quick by that time. Of course, after having done it a couple times, 1 week turnaround shouldn't strain you too hard on that one. But that's kind of where we are. Again, my message to you today is if you aren't keeping up with your tests and your discussion boards, you need to light a fire under yourself and get started on those. Don't get too far behind. Don't leave it too late. Questions that you have for me, about upcoming activities, where we need to go, what we need to do. What do you need from me?
Dr. Lamb, this is Jackie. Can you just remind us one more time how you want us to upload the PowerPoint and our reflection for this?
Just upload. You can upload them in the assignment Dropbox. I've made those, and I'll double check that, but I've made those unlimited attempts. So case study Dropbox on the menu.
Okay.
There's your PowerPoint presentation first, and then your written reflection that you were to do after today's session. I don't want war and peace. If it's more than a page and a half, you wrote too much. It's not a reflection. That's a program summary. I just want a reflection. So right there are the drop boxes for you to put your case studies in. Again, over on the menu, it says case study drop box right behind case study material.
Okay. And we just need to do one for our team as far as the presentation, just one person from our team?
Everybody needs to upload the same presentation. Otherwise, it won't register you a score for that one.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
So everybody uploads the same presentation, and that way you'll get your points. And then the reflection, everybody uploads. The reflection is not a team reflection. It's what did I get from this? What did I learn? What's my takeaway? How will this help me in my consultancy project? I hope that all your consultancies are going well, but it seems like every semester I have somebody who writes in their reflection. All right, now I understand why things aren't going as smoothly as I'd like for them to in my consultancy. We've been trying to apply the wrong methodology. I get that all the time. I expect that somebody sitting there today thinking, yeah, it may be my problem too. I'm hoping that it's not. I'm hoping that everybody's is just going swimmingly. But usually what I find is when we have this first case study, everybody says, aha, that's why I'm meeting resistance. Aha, that's why we're not making much progress with my partnering organization. Aha, we didn't gather information from the stakeholders based on the mission. So everybody has a different idea of what's important. Because we haven't sat down and kind of hammered out these things. So hopefully that's not your problem. But if it is, this may give you some insight into how to kind of get your consultancy back on track and start moving forward again. I hope that that's not the problem. But every semester I have somebody who says, who has an aha moment and says, oh, we've been trying to apply quantitative measures to a qualitative problem or vice versa. And so hopefully this will help you. Again, I'm always about the practicality of things. Hopefully this is a practical exercise that will help you in your consultancy to keep it moving forward or get it moving forward if it's not going. All right. Other questions? Look at that. We're right on time. An hour and a half. You did well. I'm very pleased. Hope everybody has a safe trip. Mike, I hope you get home soon.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Get home safely. Prayers for your safe return home. Prayers for all of you. I will see you in our next face-to-face session. So everybody have a good week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.